drink the Kool-Aid.
Where is the line between community and coercion?
The largest single incident of intentional civilian death in America before 9/11.
Wow.
Yeah, over 100 girls and women were raped by what many thought of were ghosts and demons.
Oh my God.
But once you're in, you cannot get out.
Well, that has all the markers of a cult. Hello and welcome to the Bibliofilles Cult Podcast.
We figured that as today's topic is somewhat dark, we'd take it very literally. And if you happen to be watching us, you'll see we're virtually sitting in the dark in our studio.
It's a vibe.
This was your idea.
We should have had candles and wicker stars. And okay, James. Hi, James. James, our producer, thinks we are absolutely mental.
Turn the lights on, please.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Chaya.
And I am Sophie.
And welcome to the Bibliofilles podcast, where we look at life through books. We do deep dives. And oh, do we have the most brilliant one today?
We do. We've actually been talking about it for an awfully long time, but I must point out the lighting is now so very bright. I feel like I almost can't see you, but here we are. Just to say, if you enjoy listening to this podcast, do make sure to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. It really means so much to us and makes a world of difference.
Cults, the concept of a cult, that power, the psychology of it has been something that has fascinated both of us for years.
I've honestly been perennially obsessed with cults. It's a topic that I think even as a child, I would come across, maybe it was just snippets of articles or news stories and stuff on TV maybe that made me, I don't know what it was, but I was always so interested in what surrounds cults and how people get involved and sometimes trapped or are born into them, actually. There are obviously different routes in and out of a cult. But yeah, I mean, if there's a cult, I'm down that rabbit hole every single time.
Every time. And it has cropped up so much over the last few years, and particularly in the last few months. We have a book that just been published.
Yes, I've got that right here.
The Make Believe by Hannah Murray, which is a memoir of magic and madness. There's so many shows on Netflix, from Unchosen, The Vow. I mean, there's so many books. Our deep dive on Yesteryear kind of introduced that concept, which was quite innocuous and, if I may say, insidious. That online,
the cult around like influencers and how that can sort of develop,
which is obviously a bit more nuanced. So this is what we've got coming up today. We have got a quick look at why cults fascinate us, why ordinary people join them, the etymology, etc. And then we have, obviously, it's a books podcast, cults in fiction. Both fiction and non, and then we're going to look at non-fiction as well, I should say, and the intersection between mental illness, belief, and delusion. And then we're going to think a bit about our modern internet communities becoming cults, which I think if we're not cancelled by the end of this podcast, it will be an astonishing feat.
A miracle. There's been tons of stuff in books and also TV about cults, but I actually listened to this interview with Bethany Joy Lorenz, who was a character on One Tree Hill, Hayley, the really sensible character. And I loved that show, which has now come back on Netflix. So I'm really excited about that. But this Call Her Daddy episode, she talks about how for most of the time that she was filming, she was in a very strict Christian cult called Big House.
Really?
Yep. She spent about $2 million of her money on this cult and being a member of this cult. And she was in this cult, I think, the whole time she was filming that program, which I found so interesting. And another cult reference that really sent shivers down my spine was in a book that I didn't think would necessarily have anything to do with cults, but it's a book that I absolutely loved called Daughters of the Bamboo Grove, which is a book about China's one-child policy.
It's non-fiction, right?
It is non-fiction, and it's by a brilliant, brilliant writer called Barbara Demick, and she documents what happened to a number of children in China during that time who were adopted, but actually many were in fact trafficked. And she talks about the mood of the moment. And it really, I mean, I found it kind of mind-blowing because she said that she was talking about ideas in the 1960s when this was happening. And she says, but in the 1960s, it was taken as a matter of faith that overpopulation and starvation went hand in hand. It was an idea du jour, like bell bottoms and EST therapy. So EST is considered by many to be a cult. And it was actually a group, we can call it a group, a cult, we'll discuss that, but a group that my mum actually belonged to.
Breaking news.
It is a very sensitive subject.
The child of a cult.
The child of a cult. I did say, could I say child of a cult leader? She was absolutely not a leader in any way, but she was part of EST, and it's a therapy like cults, nothing really to do with religion at all. But she went because her friends went, and because John Denver, the singer, was a huge supporter of it and like spoke about it with Werner Erhard. It stands for Erhard Seminar Training. So the big charismatic leader on TV. I mean, it was a huge thing. I think she probably just thought it was what her mates were doing and it sounded cool. But my grandparents, I don't think, liked it very much. So maybe that's why I've always been very fascinated by cults. But
would you like to talk about this more? Like a little therapy session.
I wanted my mum to come on, but she said no, but I could bring it up. So there, we've mentioned it.
And you did get permission.
I got permission.
Okay.
But I think the point is, even the word cult, like when we say it, there's such a language around the word, the topic. You've got that book, don't you?
I do. So the word cult etymologically comes from cultus, which is all about worship and devotion, cultivation, right? To cultivate devotion. And language plays such an integral role in the building of any religion or cult.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm obviously not equating the two, but when you look at the language of fanaticism, which Amanda Montell does, she looks at the examination of the power of language to be persuasive and to create that command. And actually what's very sinister about this is how the language of fanaticism is pervading modern rhetoric and
really
inculcating within us that level of extremity and that polarization.
Yeah. And I think it's that point, isn't it, that now you say the word cult and you know it's bad. Like, but
do you think that because people say that this person has a cult following, this book has a cult following?
I would say, yeah, that's true, isn't it? I guess I'm saying in terms of how I mean it in my head, but you're right, because you know, when we were talking about The Secret History, like it's a cult classic. But if...
And arguably there's a cult in there.
Yeah, arguably there is. But I think that the connotations generally, like people, if you say they're in a cult, you're not looking at as a positive.
I totally agree.
And what's interesting is though, in a book I'm reading, I've just finished, A Private Man, which is absolutely brilliant. They talk a lot about the Marian cult, the cult of the Virgin Mary.
Yes.
But that is not meant as a cult in the way we know it now.
Indeed.
It's devotion. They even describe it as tilling. It's like the actual work that goes into the devotion. And I found that really fascinating because I see the word, I'm like, oh, a cult.
That's true. So in terms of the language, you've got this insider language, a special vocabulary, private meanings. Every cult has a glossary. And what Montell does, and I cannot recommend this book highly enough.
I'd love to read
for
that.
non-fiction readers. But even, let me read this to you because I think it's just so clever. So she looks at the social science of cult influence from Jonestown and Scientologists to Soul Cycle and social media gurus who use language as the ultimate form of power. And she looks at kind of those rabbit holes from suburban mums gone QAnon.
Oh my gosh.
I know. And obviously enters the
QAnon.
extreme groups. We secretly want to know, could it happen to me? And Amanda Montell's argument is it already has.
Wow.
Yes.
I really want to read that.
You can borrow it. I bought this from America. She's got her hand out. She's a language scholar who wrote a feminist guide to taking back the English language word slut, which was amazing. But this is really, she looks at the linguistic elements that make a wide spectrum of communities cultish, which I suppose is the etymology of what we mean negatively, and how it kind of pervades startups, fitness brands, Instagram feeds. It's really devilishly funny as well. But I think language is at the heart of this conversation and the need to belong.
Yes, and I think nonfiction in that vein is really important to actually look at the evolution of language. I think when you're, thinking about nonfiction, what's so important about books and this topic, I think, is where you have memoir. Because actually, what we get from a memoir is what it is like to be inside a cult, like to really experience that to a degree. I mean, because I think there's probably a lot of similarities between cults. There are certain ingredients that they probably all have, and actually we've talked a little bit about that amongst ourselves, and we'll come to it. But a memoir itself, like you're actually learning how this person was drawn in and how often they tell the story of the escape. So one that I read recently was The House of My Mother by Ruby Frankie's daughter, Shari Frankie.
And I think why that's so important as a book to bring into this conversation at this point is that it's not a traditional cult, and the audience was such an integral part of the story.
Well, it's a cult on two fronts in a way, because you've got the story of Shari Frankie, and I'll keep it as brief as I can. Her mother, Ruby Frankie, was a big time influencer. I think one of the original kind of family influencers, and her account was called 8 Passengers. And it was all very sort of, this is us living our life and putting it all on YouTube for everyone to watch and ultimately make money. But in the end, Ruby Frankie ended up going to prison. Ultimately, what she was doing to her children was beyond horrific. And Shari Frankie was the eldest. I mean, one of the, I don't think you can still watch the video, but how she waxed her daughter's eyebrows and like put it all over YouTube for likes. And also it turned out one of the kids was being made to sleep on the floor for several months as a punishment, but like really, really mistreated, malnourished the younger children she wouldn't give snacks to or make school lunch for, and said they should do it themselves. And this was all playing out on YouTube. She was eventually imprisoned, but this all happened in tandem with her meeting a woman called Jodie Hildebrand, who was a counselor but had this very cult-like organization called Connections with an X, which in itself, so you've got the cult around, I guess, Ruby Frankie's personality, but also the cult organization of Connections that was almost bolstering up this this personality who was in the forefront. And actually, Shari Frankie talks about cults and how they work in the book, because obviously they were so much, this idea is so much part of it. She actually says how Jodie becomes part of the family and how it was so destructive. And she likens that to a cult. And she says, cults are thought to prey on the vulnerable, the lost, the broken. But here's the thing. They also can ensnare anyone who is simply a human searching for meaning, or people who are in a state of transition in their lives, young adults coming of age. For instance, intelligence is no defense. My own father, a professor, was shockingly quick to abandon his own judgment in favor of hers. I mean, it's really, really an important book when you're looking at how these mechanisms can take control of people. And you know, as she says herself, being smart is not a defense. Like, it's not going to necessarily help you. And in many ways, it can make it worse because if you are someone who is searching, these cults may act like your answer in a weird way.
Absolutely, they do. And it's so interesting because there's obviously gradients of cults. There are cults that we all think of notoriously that, you know, ensnare you financially. Every aspect of your life is controlled. Then there are others that are much more nuanced that come in, and then suddenly you find yourself doing certain things that you would never have thought of before, which we'll come to in the make-believe. Yesteryear is a really good example of that because it's not about cult. It's about nostalgia and tradwife culture and curated femininity. But it asks, why are people increasingly drawn towards systems that promise certainty? Like when lifestyle becomes an ideology and identity.
But don't you think it's interesting? Because when you think back, in most situations in history, when times are really bad, for whatever reason, you know, economic, social, whatever, people are desperate for some kind of certainty.
Yes.
And that's when you often have these kind of cults of personality that come through, these leaders who come through that maybe at any other time they wouldn't necessarily. But when people are in need, when they want that certainty, it kind of works in tandem. You can see that throughout history.
Absolutely. And that brings us to why ordinary people join them. So you've mentioned, so Sophie researched this, the BITE model.
Oh yeah, I find that so interesting.
Stephen Hassan's BITE model, which looks at 4 kinds of control: behavior, information, thought, and emotional. A cult is often less about what people believe and more about how much control the system exercises over members.
And he was in a cult. So he was in a cult called the Moonies. Look them up, fascinating. And he's come away and become like a mental health counsellor, I think, and put this theory together to sort of, I guess, package up what really constitutes a cult so that people can, I would imagine, ultimately see it in quite a simple, tangible manner.
And actually, what precipitated this specifically was Hannah Murray's memoir. So the make-believe is so powerful for me because she doesn't come from a place of superiority. It's she was an actress in Skins and The Game of Thrones.
She was Cassie in Skins. She was iconic. She played that role. And she talks about this, she always played really challenging roles. And I've heard an interview with her where she talks about, why did she get those roles?
Yes.
Did they see that in her, or how did that work? Because it was actually a role in a way that led to her becoming part of a cult, a very difficult role in a film called Detroit, which led to her going to see a Reiki healer in LA, who then inquired as to whether she might be up for something a bit more intense in London. And I think she went back to London. And so the story really gets going.
It's a very interesting book. I read it very quickly. I would have to say that, she's a Cambridge graduate. She's intelligent. She's successful. Cults don't target stupidity. She's now been diagnosed with bipolar.
Yeah.
When she's writing, the book is very sparsely written. It's almost like a diary. You feel like you're in her mind and you want her to interact with what she's being told. But she doesn't. And it almost becomes hysteria and delusion. Right?
She calls it hysteria, I think, herself in points, doesn't she?
She thinks she's saving the world. She thinks everything's a sign.
They've given her a wand to carry around and she has to know where it is at all times. I mean, when you look at that sort of from a place of having not read it, it sounds quite surreal.
Indeed. And you're like, well, why would anyone believe this? And that's the point, actually, that the way that they almost prey on someone with clearly significant either mental health issues or vulnerabilities, right? She was also spiraling. She was very, very depressed. She depicts that. And it's what I found so fascinating was the juxtaposition of someone who arguably is at the height of their career. Like you say to anyone, I am in Game of Thrones. I've got not a small role on Game of Thrones. She's being flown all over the world to do press, right? She is living the life she probably always wanted going into acting, yet she is still so desperately down and sad. She's searching for something.
But she didn't get that diagnosis till much later. But it was, she says, I think herself, looking back, obviously it was always there, those highs that she chased, and then she felt so low because she couldn't always have those highs. Indeed. But what I loved about this one is it really takes you into the room of what it is to be in a cult. I mean that in a literal way, as in you're going with her into that very blue hotel room. She talks about the practices that they do. And I actually don't think that there is a book that I've read around this subject that actually does that for a reader. You're on the journey with her. I felt like it was fascinating when they were doing that healing in the room and they were telling her that she had this special gift and what she was doing to her partner in the room, as in the person she'd been partnered up with. You really get into the granular of the practices. And then the shop where you could buy all the stuff.
There's
like
always
the cult
a gift
merch.
shop. There's a gift shop.
Merch.
And you can see the money, like they don't mention it and then suddenly it's thousands of pounds flowing out of her bank account.
And the charismatic leader who really is at the heart of this and who comes in and she has an attachment to him.
She thinks she's in love with him. It's
and
very
that he's in love with her and that he can read her thoughts. I mean, I highly recommend it, especially if you have any interest in this topic, but it's also a really important book on mental health as well.
I agree. And that brings us to Jonestown, right? The road to Jonestown.
Drink the Kool-Aid. I mean, this haunts me from childhood. I think I caught the edge of a documentary on this when I was much, much too young. I think I actually remember seeing images of the cups with and it wasn't Kool-Aid, by the way.
Tell us about the book.
I'll tell you, well, so Jim Jones was born to a poor family in Indiana. And I mean, not that you're necessarily going to know who's going to end up being a massive cult leader, but I don't think people would have necessarily thought that it would have been Jim Jones from Indiana. But what's so unbelievable at Jonestown with the actual event is that this was the largest it was the largest single incident of intentional civilian death in America before 9/11.
Wow.
Yeah. It's mind-blowing. I think 909 people died in Jonestown, which was this experiment set up in Guyana where they all moved to. And a number of those, many of them were kids.
It's so frightening. And that's the thing.
So
the horror isn't that bad people join, it's that good intentions
and
can be
they all
captured.
called it the members of the group. Like, a lot of them did this against their will, by the way. They didn't want to do this. They were made to do it. And it was called like a revolutionary suicide by some of the senior members. The whole thing is mind-blowing. But I did learn in my research that it actually wasn't Kool-Aid. It was some cheaper variant. I think it was called Flavor Aid. So I know how people say there's no such thing as bad publicity, but that was quite bad publicity for Kool-Aid, given that it wasn't their drink laced with cyanide that killed 909 people.
It's so frightening. But so I've read a number of reviews on The Road to Jonestown, and it's definitely a book that I may have already ordered.
That sounds more like me than you.
Educated by Tara Westover. Now we're looking at some of the non-fiction kind of memoirs that are adjacent to the make-believe. By Tara Westover, I think is one of the best examples that cult dynamics actually don't require a formal cult setting. There doesn't need to be the Scientology, which some people do consider Scientology a cult, others do consider it a religion, but it doesn't need to be that very flashy organization. It can be in-house, a father. Family systems can function as that kind of closed reality.
After I read Educated, I then read this by Ali Miller, which is The Last Days, and it's set in a remote town on the Scottish borders, like literally the middle of nowhere. And she's born into the Jehovah's Witnesses. Her whole life revolves around being a Jehovah's Witness and, you know, what they do in the Kingdom Hall. Everything is governed by those systems. And then she grows older and decides that, you know, actually starts questioning it and decides to leave. And I think we can learn a lot about cults through what it means to go, because actually, if you think about it, it's with cults, when you leave, you never just leave. It's like you leave everything behind, like you're complete. I think often you're just shunned, or
absolutely, you're cut off. What's very interesting on that is that the director, I believe, of Unchosen, which is a Netflix series on a cult. Sophie, you're going to be addicted to it.
Why do I not know about this? I'm going to just
and it's very, very frightening. It's a thriller. One of my best friends in the world loves it and has said to me, "Why haven't you watched it?" Like 1,000 times. Sorry, Cassie, I will get to it. But what's interesting is the director looked at how many cults are operating in England that are never spoken about because they're so clandestine. And she interviewed people that have left cults. And what fascinated her the most was when people left, they still wanted those ties back. And they would sit, a few of them depict sitting outside the halls to listen just to the songs.
It's a bit Stockholm syndrome.
It absolutely is.
Do you think I should ask my mum if that's what she does sometimes?
And she's going to hear this and get very
Sorry,
angry.
Mum.
But I think the psychology, and we're going to get to, we're going to come to our next section now, which is cults and fiction. And there is so many books that we can recommend.
There are.
Going back to Bite and the concept of what it means to join brings me to mind of Albert Camus and the absurdism versus all of those arguments that we had in terms of the philosophy. And I just think in a world of chaos and tumult, there is a huge comfort in just handing off control.
Yes, and being in a system that you don't have to really think about, as in you're just there.
And the community.
But it's the same reason why, and I'm going back to a point I made, but it's the same reason why in history people find themselves supporting people, joining the Hitler Youth. Like, it's part of the system. And when you're in a state of real turmoil surrounding you, that's ultimately how seemingly ordinary, decent people can get swept up in these rather extraordinary events in some ways.
Absolutely. And so, and that is so borne out in the fiction that we have. So The Girls by Emma Cline is really...
I haven't read that. I know you've just read it.
And, you know, it's so interesting because the cult leader is not the point. It's based on the Manson murders, and it puts you in the mind of the people that were operating within that. And Evie doesn't want Charles Manson. Like, she just wants to be chosen. She's one of the characters. It's very, very languid, surreal prose. But, you know, the Manson murders are such a big cultural moment as well as such an obvious tragedy. And it shows how these kind of very vulnerable young women can get swept up and honestly give all of their autonomy over. Another one.
Was it a good book?
Oh, it's phenomenal.
Okay.
I really enjoyed it. I found it very easy to read. Like, it wasn't gratuitous or hard, but it painted such a visceral picture. Another one that I have to mention is Arcadia by Lauren Groff.
I haven't read that. You love Lauren Groff.
I adore Lauren Groff. I think she is she's a writer that I find when I'm watching interviews or reading interviews with other authors, they mention the most.
A writer's writer.
Yes. And Arcadia is such a great literal exploration of like a utopian community. A child grows up inside this idealistic commune. And the question at the heart of it is, where is the line between community and coercion?
If you are regular listeners to this podcast or you follow us on Instagram, you'll probably know that the queen of queens for me is Margaret Atwood. She is just the best. And I actually think that this book, The Heart Goes Last, is not one that loads of people talk about.
Interesting.
I just don't think it is. And it was I actually think, in fact, I definitely did. I read this before I read The Handmaid's Tale.
Right.
And I absolutely loved it. And arguably, obviously, The Handmaid's Tale, I'm not going to go into the plot on that. There's a very cultish element to that book. This one's really interesting and so brilliantly written, unsurprisingly. But if you haven't read it, I'd really urge you to. It's about a couple, and the woman is Charmaine, and she sees an advert for a project called Positron. And it promises you a job, a place to live, somewhere to sleep. And she is really, her and her partner are really in a bad place. They really have no money. She's working in a really crappy bar. They're living in their car. So her and her husband, Stan, they apply straight away because why wouldn't you? But once you're in, you cannot get out. It is so, and the way that the leaders speak about the project, you know, I'm sitting there thinking, oh, actually, like, you totally get it. And that's what's so brilliant about the right fiction, because it makes you understand the psychology on both sides about how this could play out.
Absolutely. And Margaret Atwood has always said there's nothing in her books that hasn't appeared in fiction. And
well, she says it in relation to The Handmaid's Tale, but for sure it's this too. And actually, there's another book, and you may also know if you follow us on various channels, that I like to ration Margaret Atwood books because I get scared that I might finish them and have no more to read in a certain year. But The Year of the Flood is the second in a trilogy. I've read Oryx and Crake, which I loved, and this is part 2. And it's supposed to be very much a book about cults. And there is it's like an eco-religious cult in this book called God's Gardeners. So this one came out in 2009, and they're like this very environmentally conscious but also apocalyptic group who predict like a massive bioengineered disaster. It kind of makes me feel a bit like, you know, when we were much younger and the millennium was coming.
Yes.
And there were people who were hoarding all the cans of tuna and baked beans in their cupboards because they felt the end was coming. I wonder if it's like that, but I'm sure this one will be huge on this topic.
No, but that's one of the main books from my research that came up as a fictional book on cults.
I think I'm going to love it. I actually now want to read it. I don't know why I haven't yet, but now I have to.
Because you
should read The Heart Goes Last.
Well, it's funny because you talk about apocalyptic.
It's like a tongue twister.
And Station 11 for me is that book. And Emily St. John Mandel is one of my favourite authors. And in Station 11, the cult is centred around the prophet, an antagonistic character named Tyler Leander. And this is like a nomadic cult composed primarily of brainwashed children post this horrific apocalypse that people are facing. And it's interesting because there's discourse around Station 11 is not a book on a cult. It is a book about a post-apocalyptic world. However, the cult is a really important aspect of how people cope. And we come back to the chaos and tumult.
How do you cope with the chaos? Give me some order, please.
Indeed. And like another book that I would absolutely also talk about here, which does not get spoken about from a cult perspective, but from my research very much should be, is The Water Cure by Sophie McIntosh.
Oh, I read that book ages ago. She's an amazing writer.
Well, I think it was shortlisted for the Booker. And she has written Cursed Bread, which we adored.
And she's also written Blue Ticket, which is it's a dystopian novel to do with pregnancy.
Yes.
It's really brilliant.
It's based on King Lear. It's this man that raises his 3 daughters on a secluded island using brutal daily therapies, like near drowning and suffocation, to supposedly protect and purify them.
Wow.
And the cult-like elements are there, like the restrictive, isolating rituals, the brutality, the self-modification and protection. It's very, very well written because her prose always is. But that is a harder read. I found that hard to read, actually. Did you? You read it a long time ago.
I read it a really long time ago. I mean, but I think she writes so beautifully.
Oh.
There's something really like lyrical about the way she writes. You
Yes.
sometimes feel like you're reading a song in some ways.
Oh, that's how I feel about the Song of Achilles.
That's for another time.
That's definitely not a cult. Though I am in a cult for Madeleine Miller.
So there's this author who I really love. And I actually think that at least in the UK, from where we're filming, she's not massively well known. She's from Canada. And I think readers in the States have definitely heard about her much more. She's much more well known there. I found her book, one of her books, in a bookshop. It must have been, 20 years ago. And it was a book called A Complicated Kindness about a girl who is part of a pretty small Mennonite community in Manitoba. And her mother and sister have left, and she's kind of trying to understand why. And it's a really fascinating book in the way that, as I mentioned with, I guess, like Hannah Murray's book, The Make-Believe shows us the inside of what it is to be in a cult, but from a non-fiction perspective, A Complicated Kindness really shows what it's like to grow up in a community, a closed community like this. But she more recently wrote a book called Women Talking. I think you'd love this, Kaya.
Okay, we're getting recommendations.
I really think you would. So this one is based on another Mennonite community in Bolivia, but it's also based on a true story. And in this colony, between 2005 and 2009, over 100 girls and women were raped by what many thought of were ghosts and demons.
Oh my God.
They then discover that it is not ghosts and demons, it is men. And in this book, this is like an imagined response to those real events and how they meet to discuss how they're going to protect themselves and what they're going to do about it. But they've only got 2 days to decide before these rapists are bailed out and brought back. I mean, God. I actually find it bizarre that you've not read this. I think you would really, it's really incredible. But obviously there's something hugely about cult dynamics that is kind of embedded in this text because, this is the kind of the flip side. It's like, how do you get out? What happens? I just found it mind-blowing, like how this could happen as well.
Yeah.
But that's when you've got such an enclosed community and it's governed in this way, sometimes those really terrible things stay within that community and don't get dealt with the way they ought to be.
No, they don't. And, that brings me to mind because obviously there is a wider question here that I feel like is shouting at me in the face, which is, we've talked about the line between community and coercion. What we haven't talked about is the line between cult and religion. And there are many practices that people, atheists, agnostics, etc., see within organised faith and think, well, that has all the markers of a cult.
Yes.
And what's very interesting is that Jodie Chapman is an author who wrote Oh Sister. This is a proof. It's the story of 3 sisters, Isabel, Jen and Zelda, and their bodies and minds are not their own. They belong to a church, a doomsday church. And she wrote in The Guardian about how being raised as a J witness and then reading the fiction of Atwood, Thomas Hardy and George Orwell challenged her understanding of the world. And that led her, that almost was the inspiration.
So was she raised? Was that how Jodie Chapman was raised?
She was raised thinking that Armageddon was going to come.
No idea.
Every witness child was given a copy of my book of Bible stories. It taught the story of Abraham and Isaac and Lot and etc. And the fact was that they were all heading towards the end of time.
But where is the line?
That's the
Where
point.
is the line? No, but when I think about it now, you kind of get it. Why people would look at organised religions and say, this is
I think it's the control, but it's the control aspect, isn't it? I think it's the control aspect because obviously in this book, it's the extreme aspect. But I think Jodie Chapman would say, and she talks about the fact that doublethink and classics like Tess of the D'Urbervilles and the Forsyte Saga, like there were characters going against the accepted morals of their day and how that kind of changed her mentality around her upbringing. And this is very much the story of these women where it's not a dystopia. This is not the future or the past or fantasy. It's real. It's happening now. And can we break free?
It's so brilliant because, you know, that's the fact about fiction. That's the fact about fiction. But it is in that, you know, she is writing from her own experience. And inevitably, many, many authors are drawing on from what's happened to them in their own lives and putting it in this way. We're able to really engage with it in ways that, you know, we may not have seen or understood cults in this way had it not been for their own experience that they've put down in such a readable but also educative manner.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I also wanted to mention Grady Hendrix, just for the horror fans. Like, Witchcraft for Wayward Girls is all about these fast girls, wayward girls, loose girls. They said the devil had tempted us and we had sinned. And they go to a home and to get the devil out of them. And it is so funny.
But we need a bit of humour in the cult
It really
section.
is funny.
Yeah,
it's funny.
It's important.
But it's visceral, like it's gory, but it's hysterical. And I loved every second of it.
Did you want to talk about, you loved that book? The Gabriel Krause book.
This book.
You know what? I bought it because you told me to. And for some reason, I've not gotten around to it.
Look at my tabs.
Yeah, I feel a bit sad now.
I don't think that anyone would connect who they was to cults.
Well, I disagree. I've not even read it, but in my mind, there has to be a parallel between gang culture and cults.
It's interesting. The Times felt that reading this was like reading A Clockwork Orange.
Really? Oh.
And that, I think, is very similar. So A Clockwork Orange is that classic where 15-year-old Alex doesn't like ultra-violence. He enjoys rape, drugs, and Beethoven's Ninth, and he and his gangs rampage through a dystopian future. And then there's the government psychologist, Dr. Brodsky, and it's very hard to read.
How they use aversion therapy.
And classical conditioning. Who They Was is absolutely one of the most mesmerising books I've ever read. It is the story about gangs and violence and breaking out of that social conditioning.
Was the author in a gang?
Yes.
Yeah.
I would consider this to be autofiction. It was Booker longlisted at the time because this is the story of the author's years as a university student who was also a gang member.
Right.
And down from the language that connects him to his cohort to when he's in university and he's facing all of these other ideas, it's the story of London. It says you won't find in any guidebooks. It was such a hard read because you just wanted to help him and just take him out of there because he can see the practices and it is ritualistic, are so bad. They are so abhorrent. They're so criminal. They're so violent. The loss in here of people over nothing.
Yeah.
And the reputations that are so important, the vengeance. And then he says the boredom, the rush, the despair. It's so poetic. It's so powerful. At times, I honestly felt that every other line should be on quotes like around the world because it was so incredibly potent. Listen to this. I point out that we were, if we were living in Holland, we wouldn't be having this conversation because legally I'd be considered an entrepreneur and not a drug dealer. Like these societal parameters.
Yeah. Where you're coming from. fascinating.
But it's interesting that you thought of this as a cult.
I did. I just picked it up because I think it's all that kind of, it's
Closed
that group, exactly, that closed group.
And when we're talking about groupthink, what do we think of?
1984.
Of course.
Yeah. So many of these dystopian novels, and many of them I adore, they've all got that element to them, which is probably all linked to my fascination with cults.
Because you were born into a cult.
Oh, God. I think actually we probably, thinking about it, live in a world where it's really quite easy to become part of, I'm going to say something cultish, but all those almost like marketing, selling, pyramid type schemes that you can get involved with online. There is something quite unnerving about them. And I think now with the access that people have to other people, if you are someone online, I'm thinking, who has influence of some way, like how you exercise it and what can happen beyond that is kind of scary. Like your reach can be so much greater. You can spread ideas, or you can draw people in. You can get people to make payments at the drop of a hat. I mean, it's nothing now.
Well, we previously on another episode talked about looksmaxing and incel culture. I mean, there are so many aspects to that
that have
our cults
spread.
like.
No, and all these ideas through being online, that is prime breeding ground for them. So I think we, the world that we live in now, topics like this are really important to get to the bottom of.
Are modern internet communities becoming cults? If we think of cultish, Shari Frankie, yesteryear, I think, it's interesting because there's a book that we haven't mentioned because it was one of our focal points in Looksmaxing, which is Rouge. And Mona Awad has written Bunny. There's cults in the Bunny. But Rouge is a wellness cult that becomes incredibly dystopic and hot and violent.
Well, and Hannah Murray's book, The Make Believe, that pitched itself as an almost wellness group.
I think there's so much of, when we see the language that's pervading us and influencers and wellness and fandoms and self-help, even productivity culture, even political communities, everything has become so polarized that the gradient has become a bit blurred.
And we are so easy to get hold of now in a way that maybe we weren't. And I think it sort of shows us that actually you do kind of come full circle, and it all comes back as well down to the language. Like that is so relevant now. You mentioned it to me yesterday when you were saying how when we use words like obsessed, and I was so conscious that I did it at the beginning. I said I was perennially obsessed with cults. Even that language has something cultish to it.
Yeah.
And now it's just sort of the term sort of thrown around in a kind of lackadaisical way. But actually, what is it reflecting? What's it showing back to us as a society?
And the disinformation.
Yeah.
Because the blurred lines between religions and cults, people would say are coercion, it's control, it's the impact that it has on someone, it's the lack of autonomy that you would see in your textbook cult, it's the crimes that are absolved on religious grounds. But then you look at crimes that are undertaken historically on the basis of religion, that they're innumerable.
Yeah.
And then but I think it's the control aspect but your point about how connected we all are to one another, if you've got a platform, you can espouse anything at this point. That kind of fake news concept.
For the good and for the bad.
Yeah. I think cults is going to be something that we always think about in the back of our minds.
We'll probably come back to it.
It's such a huge aspect of dystopia, particularly in fiction. And we would love to know what books you have loved that have either featured a cult or have that kind of...
I want more. Give me more.
Oh, you've got a few. You're going to be taking some of my books, aren't you?
100%. I'm already eyeing them up.
Thank you so much for joining us, and see you next week.
Bye.